Hello and welcome to another Anthony's Animation Talk interview video. I haven't done too many of these, but I will be doing more for certain. But I have a very special guest with me today, the author of the Disney Revolt, which I'm holding right here, and Jake's holding right as well. Jake S. Friedman, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Yes, we got the wonderful book over here,
Yeah.
which is such a fantastic book. I was riveted. But for those people who don't know who you are, Jacob, did you want to just tell people a bit about yourself and your history when it comes to animation?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an animation historian. I started studying animation history back in the 90s when I was a teen, and I just couldn't put it down. So I teach animation history at New York University and at Fashion Institute of Technology here in New York, where I live, where I'm talking to you from. I worked in animation for a good 10 years on like cartoon shows and a couple animated movies. But I always loved the history of it. I always loved the golden age in particular. I just really liked any underdog stories in animation, particularly where people were kind of like fighting against the odds to do something momentous. And the golden age of Disney is one of those things. I've always loved those classic Disney films and classic Looney Tunes films, the golden age of animation in general. Anything from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that's my jam.
Oh, yes. Same with me, definitely. So, I mean, I guess you kind of answered this already. I was going to say, what led you to write about this book? And you mentioned, of course, you love a good underdog story. But were there any other reasons, like what drew you to, I guess, this Disney strike to write about that?
Well, there are two answers to this. One is that my parents were always part of a teachers union, and I just kind of grew up with that understanding. Not really raising any banners or going on marches or anything, but just knowing that a union is kind of part of people's careers, just kind of like taking it as a given. And I grew up in Disney, like with the love of the cartoons, with the films, with all that stuff. We had Disney Channel in the 80s, back when it was brand new. We went to the parks sporadically. We didn't live near there, but we would, I think by the time I was 9, I had been there 3 times already in Florida. So pro union in the family, pro Disney in my childhood. And then by the time I was in my mid 20s, my ex professor of animation history named John Culhane. Some of your listeners might know him as the author of the book on Fantasia, the book on Aladdin, the book on Fantasia 2000, as well as one of the people interviewed in many documentaries, including Frank and Ollie, that great documentary about Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. And he's all over YouTube. You can find him on YouTube. He was like a roving reporter with just a love for classic animation and Disney in particular. John Culhane told me when I was 26 or 27, he said that I was going to write this book. This wasn't a question. This wasn't up for debate. He just told me that I was going to write this book and I was going to write about Art Babbitt, like write the book about Art Babbitt so that Art Babbitt would not be forgotten. And Art Babbitt, I kind of sort of knew who he was at that point. I knew that he had a hand in the Disney strike, but there hadn't been a lot written about the Disney strike at that time, back in 2006. 2007-ish. And certainly nothing from Disney Editions or Hyperion, the Disney publishing imprints. The more I kind of delved into it, John had contacted Barbara Babbitt, Art Babbitt's widow, and she just opened her house, her personal collection of records to me. And I spent years traveling to and from her place. She lives in Hollywood, or lived in Hollywood before she passed away. And every year I would fly out there and spend a week or two just like digging through her personal treasures and kind of getting to know who Art Babbitt was and what it takes to be like a person who at the time was one of the world's greatest animators, who then decided to stand up and lead a labor strike against Walt Disney, the king of all ages entertainment, even then, 1941. So it was a very interesting like exploration of who this man was, who Art Babbitt was. And while I was at it, I also wanted to discover like who Walt Disney was, like his personality and how he got to be so resistant to unions at a time when every craft in Hollywood was unionizing. Screen Actors Guild, Screen Directors Guild, Screenwriters Guild, and so on and so on and so on. Why did Walt Disney stand so firm against this rising tide of change? So I wanted to kind of like delve into their personalities, tell this really exciting story, and do justice to the memory of Art Babbitt and also all the 330-ish strikers who put their careers on the line to make this happen. And by the way, it's a happy story in that they succeeded in their goal, and the Disney studio, the animation artists of the Disney studio, still have a union to this day.
Some people would have some common misconceptions about this strike. I mean, what did you find as you were writing? Like, what were people thinking beforehand versus what you found out later on? Like, were there anything that stood out? Like, was Vault, I guess, evil and that sort of thing?
What a good question. Yeah, people wanted to divide this between good and evil. This wasn't a good and evil story, and I don't know. You read the book. Did you feel like it was a good and evil story?
No, I felt that both Walt and Art were human. They both did great things, and they both did things that they probably would, yeah, maybe regret a little. We're all human. We'll do silly things, I guess. I don't know about you, but that definitely is the case with me. But yeah, I didn't see it as Walt being this evil. I hate unionists. Like, I want to tear down all these strikers' careers and that sort of thing. So at least that's how I came from it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to, portray in the book. These are complicated figures, and when you have someone who's as larger than life as Walt Disney, all of his virtues and his flaws are going to be magnified 100-fold. So, so he's just a human being who was the boss of many hundreds of people in creating momentous works of art that has lasted well beyond his death. But at the time, he was trying to follow his dream. And his dream was part of that dream was kind of like wrapped around the idea that he had to be in control in order to survive. And that came from the trauma that he had from the whole Oswald incident, where he created this really successful cartoon character. And then the guy who commissioned him to just took the rights back. Walt actually never owned the rights, but this guy just like gave the rights to produce the cartoon to someone else, kind of kept it and like created his own studio. And now Walt was left without anything. And it was from that he kind of like slapped his name on his studio and like wanted it to be not Disney Brothers, but the Walt Disney Studio, a Walt Disney production, the Walt Disney cartoon. And he tied his identity so closely up to his product because of this trauma from nearly going broke. And he has talked about, even to his staff, he talked about going through like a mental breakdown at the time. So this was like a real serious, like instigating event that had lasting effects on him and the choices that he would make. Now, unfortunately, I think to answer your question, one misconception is that Walt was making all the decisions on his own, like in a vacuum. And he wasn't. He heavily relied on the wisdom, air quotes, of his vice president and chief legal counsel, Gunther Lessing, who isn't really explored in a lot of other Disney books, but he was
I didn't know who he
huge.
was either. I really didn't. I knew of maybe the name once or something, but I was like, oh, there's this other guy that I've hardly known about.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think he liked to keep a low profile, kind of the way that Roy, Walt's brother, kept a low-ish profile, Like he was happy to step back and let Walt be the star of this circus, be the ringleader of his studio. That's what I mean when I say circus. But it was Gunther Lessing, who was several years older than even Roy, and was kind of like Walt's ad hoc father figure at a time when Walt heavily resented his own father, that like influenced Walt to make these decisions and kind of became Gunther Lessing became the labor representative for the company when he was totally unqualified to do so. He was really good at being a yes man for Walt. And folks in the studio knew that the way to get ahead at the Disney studio was to be a really good yes man for Walt. Gunther Lessing kind of leaned into Walt's fears about unions. And there was media that said that all unions were led by gangsters and all unions were led by communists and all unions were untrustworthy, you know. And there were pundits in those newspapers who kind of like they got a lot of readership, and they were really swaying public opinion to that side, that unions were all crooked, when of course that wasn't true. It was just kind of fear of the status quo and fear of the Roosevelt administration at the time. And Gunther Lessing leaned into that and showed Walt this and exposed Walt to these newspapers, and and did his best to convince Walt that Walt was under threat by the union and that the union was using unfair bullying tactics. You can read how he's like manipulating the situation by like opening up the conversations whose transcriptions I was able to find and insert in the book, which were some of my favorite treasures that I was able to put in the book. Like they were actual meeting transcriptions, word for word, like stenographer style, that you can see the reasons and reasoning of these folks for why they were doing what they were doing. I'll never have another juicy trove of treasures like that. And that just came from some of the research that I was able to uncover. Oh,
Yeah,
and another misconception is that Walt was an anti Semite, and I have no evidence of that. And some of these like inside notes are what I have to support that he wasn't. People are calling him all these different names, but anti Semite never comes up.
I think it might have been from the Three Little Pigs. There was one sort of Jewish peddler joke in the original version of it, and it's like all of a sudden, yep, he's an anti-Semite. It's just I don't know where that's come from. It's absolutely ridiculous. But in terms of research for this book, I mean, what were some of the challenges? Because I would imagine that all of these people are long gone, of course. Like, how does one even approach this sort of thing? I know you would fly to Hollywood, of course, and all that stuff. But yeah, tell us about some of the challenges in compiling the research for this.
Oh my gosh. I knew like the more breadcrumbs I found, the more it led me to like troves of information that just gave me more questions. One question was like opening up Art Babbitt's diary and seeing him reference his lawsuits, plural, against Walt Disney. I'm like, wait a second, lawsuits against Disney? Like plural? And I had to figure out what that meant. Turns out that Art Babbitt sued Disney twice at the same time. Again, it's in the book. But then I needed to find out information about like each of those lawsuits. And that led me down another path. And it's just like acquiring more and more information. And it was really hard to know when to stop. In the end, you know, it was like a time machine. I wanted to really surround myself with as much of this world as possible. And I wanted to find out who this person was, what this person was earning, who these names are that are mentioned in this document. And the world of 1940, 41 started to come to life for me. I was able to really understand some of these like subtle references people are making, like in the court document, for instance. Like I was able to find this 1,500 page legal document. It was 8 pages of court transcripts plus evidence when Art Babbitt, through the National Labor Relations Board, sued Walt Disney for unlawfully firing him. The labor board said that this was discrimination for his act in the strike. And so these 8 days of transcripts and all that evidence has references to dates and names and things. And I was like, who is this? Where can I find more about this? And each door just opened up to more doors and more doors. Not to mention like understanding the kind of language like just lingo that people used back then. I had to learn how to sort of translate legal documents from the 40s. I sort of wanted to listen to what the music was like at the time and figure out what the bus routes were that people would take to the Disney studio if they had to get to work, and like just diving so deep into what life was like for your average animator, because it had never really been done. There are people who wrote their memoirs, but there wasn't like a full exploration of letting the readers walk in the shoes of someone who had worked for Walt Disney during the golden age, and like what that must have been like. At the end, my book ended up being 50% longer than what you're holding in your hands. So in our hands, minus all of the notes and the appendix and stuff, it comes to about 250 pages, which is, I think a reasonable length for a book. All those notes are there if you want to delve a little bit deeper. But the original draft would have been closer to like 350 pages. My editor basically asked me he instructed me to edit it down. I had to edit down by a third. So a 12 a 120,000 word book on Microsoft Word ended up being 80,000 words. If it wasn't part of the story of the strike, it had to go. There are some bits that I just could not let go of, and for those bits, they're either in the notes or they're in like a footnote, because I figured this is too cool or important to let go entirely.
In terms of what was cut, I mean, what were some of the interesting things that you had to let go that you thought, okay, fair enough, it's not quite the strike, but it was still cool nonetheless? Anything come to mind?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, what life was like working at the Terry Toon studio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had like a whole chapter on Terry Tunes. I had to edit it down to maybe like half or a third of a chapter. And just lots of interesting stuff about that. Now, Terry Tunes I had to keep it in there not only because Art Babbitt worked there before Disney, but it was such an interesting comparison of how a very efficient but non-artistic animation studio works.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and you can go on YouTube to see what these Terry Toon cartoons are. They're not interesting. They're just churning stuff out. And they were producing stuff at 3 times the rate at Disney, but they were selling it because people at the time would go to the theater and see anything. And theaters would just like buy them in bulk. So he was creating like quantity over quality. Paul Terry was. So there was a lot more on Paul Terry. There was more on young professional Walt Disney. We all have heard the story that older Walt Disney would tell when reminiscing about the creation of Mickey Mouse, how he came up with him on the train ride back from New York on his way back to Hollywood. But when I was researching magazines of that time, it turns out that the story is a little bit different when it was remembered by Walt 5 years after the fact rather than 30 years after the fact. Um, and that the train ride, it was just like he basically spent 3 days on this cross country train, just like in an awful mood and cursing and yelling, and just like his wife was there. Lillian was there just trying to calm him down, and that Mickey Mouse was not conceived on the train, but was like an extra. He was a cartoon extra that they pulled out of the woodwork with iWorks once they got back to the studio.
Similar to that story of, I think, Lady the Tramp, he was saying for a while, about a gift being given, and it was like a dog popping out of a box or something. He would tell that story, and then it turned out that it was just a fabrication, which I thought was really interesting. That actually even put it on the DVD when it came out later on. That it's like, oh no, that was a fabrication. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's, well, what was a showman? So I guess that's the sort of thing he would do. Keep the audiences entertained and all that. As you were opening doors and, of course, getting all this information, how did you keep track of everything, especially not just even with the animation stuff, but also all the union changes and all that? What caused you to not lose your mind over this, just an overload of information coming at you.
I used a lot of tools at my disposal. I created a blog called Babbitt blog, and it started out just as a way for me to organize my notes, and I didn't know where else to put it. Like if I have something really cool that I discovered, the blog was a great way to just like put this cool thing and like cite some sources. And when I was like writing the book years after the blog, I sometimes referred back to the blog. Even now, I still sometimes refer back to it if I need to pull something from it because, you can tag each post. And I was really as meticulous as I could be for post tagging. And it became just a great way to organize all my research up to that point. I used the Google Calendar on my laptop to organize the events of the strike. So I would go back to like April 1941, May 1941, and I would place the events in my laptop calendar, you know, as if it was an upcoming event. But that's how I sort of plotted the day by day of the strike based on the information that I had. And in the notes section of each entry on that calendar, I would put what my source was. With that, the story came together as a story when I was able to plot the events down on a calendar. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. And if you read any other account of the strike, it's just kind of basically a big stew of this happened and also this happened and also this happened. And there's really no order in these descriptions of what happened and when and why. But once I put all the events down in the course of like basically 4 years. I mean, like we're going from like 1937 into 1941. So I put as many events as I could plot in that span, and the story started to take shape. The slow boiling feeling of disrespect the animators were getting and the need for this union, like it really came to a head. And I wanted to kind of like plot out how it came to that head and how each stage of that process was another straw on the camel's back. Did you get that reaction when you were reading the book?
Yeah, the way that the official Disney stuff that comes out, be it in documentaries and all that stuff, it seems to be like the strike just happened. It was like, okay, people are annoyed, were annoyed at Walt, and they striked. Where in fact, as your book points out, it was a lot more to it. It was a lot more complicated. As you were writing it, I would imagine you would have a lot of conflicting accounts of certain events. You would have one person saying one thing, one person saying another, the trade report saying this, and so on. How did you reconcile that? How did you work out, okay, what would be most likely the truth for the book?
I didn't rely on people's memory.
Yes.
Like as much as possible, hardly at all. There's a little bit here and there for the events before the strike, but for the events of the strike itself, I didn't use any sources past 1948. And a lot of these old timers were interviewed into their old age from the 1970s and 80s and 90s. They were all interviewed about the strike. But I can't remember what I did for like my birthday 5 years ago. Do you remember what you did for your birthday 5 years ago?
Well, I'm 37, so no. I think ever since I turned 30, I haven't remembered any of my birthdays. So it's
So people were asking these folks in their 70s or 80s to, for the record, describe what the strike was like from, 30 years after the fact. And I would look at these and tried to figure out what the event was that actually happened and what this lens was that they're looking through. I hardly used like any quotes of recollections from people in the decades after the fact. I had plenty to work with between like newspaper articles and court documents and testimony and letters and diaries that I was able to pull up stuff from in or around that time. Um, People's memories also, like people grew bitter and the years just bred more and more of that bitterness. So I was really hesitant to put anything down unless I could, as they say, triangulate my research, find other sources that could back it up. And some things I couldn't. Like there's there are many apocryphal stories out there about like people, inkers or painters fainting from malnutrition or lack of just not being able to afford lunch for themselves because they're being paid so low. I couldn't find anything like that. That seems to have been a story that was concocted years later. If I find evidence of it, that'll go in the next edition, I guess. But so far, I found nothing on that. One thing I did find that was interesting was, there were talks that, oh, Walt's HR department separated the strikers from the non-strikers. And so whenever it was time for layoffs, the strikers would be the first to go. This is after the strike. So like even after the strike, there was just like discrimination amongst the people who had once gone on strike. And that seemed to be really, another bitter memory and probably conjecture. Like, where's the proof of that? And then I actually found the proof of that. Their employee records were designated striker or non-striker, and that they were separated after the strike for purposes of dismissal if there ever came a layoff. So when I was able to find proof, that was great. And if I couldn't find proof of something that someone told me, then it just couldn't go in. And there are so many great stories that old timers told. A lot of those great stories are in Tom Cito's book called Drawing the Line, where he dedicates a chapter to the Disney strike. But I really just wanted to stick to descriptions from that time as much as possible. So it had, although it's a good story, I wanted to have an air of, scholarship to it as well.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. As you say, memories are funny thing, and bitterness comes into it. It's definitely one of those things. Um, I mean, are there any, I guess, unsolved mysteries that you just, for whatever reason, you just could not work out in your research in terms of the events of the strike?
No, I don't think so. I think I solved them all.
Ah, that's
That's
good.
how my work was done. There were so many alleys to go through. Like I had to figure out, like Gunther Lessing wasn't all he was cracked up to be. He had this like really crazy professional relationship with Dolores Del Rio that he never told the Disney folks about. But like I was able to uncover this, and that kind of informed how he did business. There are hints of things in other books, like in the Frank and Ollie book, The Illusion of Life. There are hints, and this is like a Disney published book. There are hints that there was unease in the ink and paint department, and they talk about the bonus system being like a big mess. I think they call it a bonus fiasco, and they say that there were lead animators who just handed more work to their assistants so they could get more bonuses. So it appeared that they were doing more paper mileage, more pencil mileage, they called it. I figured out what all of these hints were talking about. Um, I figured like whenever I'm looking through one of these old like books that are animators, Disney loyalists or not, reminiscing or talking about the strike, or even what Disney was like back in the golden age, they're hinting at things, and I wanted to understand like not what they're talking about from their perspective, but what is the actual event that they are pulling from to write this sentence from memory, like what is the root of this thing? And it turns out that like this bonus fiasco was one of the like incendiary events of this of labor unrest, and it had started in 1934, and that the accusations that animators were unfairly taking advantage of this, that came as an accusation towards Art Babbitt, that Walt assumed that Babbitt was passing more work off to his assistants and kind of like clocking in more completed work unfairly. I have no evidence of that either. In fact, he seemed to kind of be an overly tight animator. Like his assistants had a lot less to do than most other animators. His drawings were just kind of clean and meticulous before the assistants even got to it. So it just seemed to be kind of like a slur that people threw in Art Babbitt's direction. There are, talks about the creation of the film Snow White that I wanted to get to the root of. I wanted it to be so that my book would answer or fill in the gaps of any hanging questions that people might have when reading any other pre-existing book on Disney. Because there are things that are easy to miss unless you know what was going on at the time. I wanted to kind of also pull back the curtain and show what kind of job it was. Like people were coming into work. This was a job. This wasn't, pixie dust. This wasn't magic beyond hard work and incredible creativity. Like these, yes, that was there, but these people were like clocking into work and doing their assignments and then leaving, and not really considering that what they were doing was going to be part of our like cultural fabric at all. So I wanted to sort of illustrate that this was work, and that these were people who were employees and who believed in their employer and who believed in the work that they were doing. But at the end of the day, like, what was the work? I wanted the readers to understand this. I wanted readers to really like get the experience of being an animator at the time. Kind of like, you know, I was an animator for 10 years. I wanted people to understand what this was like.
And speaking of Snow White, I mean, probably one of my biggest, well, I don't want to say surprise, but because I kind of knew it, but I'm glad your book delved into it more, is that Walt promised, or the management promised the animators, hey, if we finish this Snow White, you'll get this big bonus afterwards, and that just never came to pass. I mean, why do you think that happened? Like, why do you think Walt just didn't honor that promise that was made to the animators?
Walt and Roy and Gunther Lessing, the top people of the company, they were trying to motivate their workers. They were trying to create incentives, and at the time, like that kind of like sociology was never really studied. There weren't books on management. There were no books on leadership. It wasn't like you could go into a self help section in the bookstore or something and like pick that up. So they're trying to figure this out. How do you motivate your employees to do what no one had ever done before? To make Snow White. How do you get them to stay and not quit? Because some artists did quit. Hardy Gramacki quit so he could become a children's book illustrator. He ended up doing Little Toot. He was a friend of Art Babbitt's. But plenty of folks wanted to, go out on their own, and for whatever reason, whether they believed in the Disney company or not, they just wanted to, strike out on their own. So Walt wanted to incentivize his folks, and this is the plan that the management came up with, give people a bonus for good work. And it was kind of what they said was it was like a percentage of like shared profits. But what was weird was that there was no clear like mathematics stipulated. So people didn't really know how the dollar amount got to be what it was. They just ended up with a check one day, and it said the titles of the shorts and the dollar amount. And then, okay, extra money, sure, no problem. But then when those stopped coming, that's when it's like, oh, I was counting on that. They were thinking I was counting on that to sort of like build my future. Why they stopped? Walt invested the money after Snow White. He invested the money back into the studio, and he needed the money to build the new studio in Burbank. And he thought, well, I'm not pocketing the money and buying, a bigger house for me. That was sort of Paul Terry's MO. Paul
Of
Terry
course.
would, yeah, he would like pocket everything, and the studio remained, a crap hole with secondhand furniture, literally secondhand furniture. Walt Disney was like, I'm going to give my artists the finest custom made furniture by like a modern art designer. It's going to be brand new studio, brand new buildings. We're going to have air conditioning. Whew, that's crazy. Air conditioning in 1940. We're going to have an on campus auto shop. So if your car needs work, you get it checked out for free. We're going to have an ice cream shop, slash soda shop, and you can just order an ice cream soda from your desk and someone will come and deliver it to you. We're going to have a like an athletic club for the top earners, and you all can go work out for free in this athletic club. So he was like really trying to give back to his artists, and for a lot of his artists that was great, they loved it. And for all about an equal number of artists, they were like, no, I needed the money to build my family and like put a down payment on a house. I don't need a new desk, I don't need a new chair, I don't need access to an athletic club, I don't need ice cream served at my desk, I need a fatter bank account. Remember, this was also still during the Great Depression. So, there's an interesting author named Dan Ariely, who is a psychologist or sociologist who talks about how to motivate employees. And his thesis is motivate with things or gifts and not with money, and you'll have more success. If you motivate with money, your employees, it'll kind of like disrupt the relationship that they have with your employer. And he writes a lot about this. And I find it really fascinating because, the human experience leads us to believe that we would want money more than gifts. Yet, when it comes to the employer-employee relationship, it doesn't really work that way. Go figure.
So when it comes to the strike itself, now of course we have Babbitt, as you established. Has that, always has that, I guess, sense of justice, like
Yeah.
the underdog and so on. Uh, do you think Art could have handled the strike action a bit better, like in terms of his role in it, like, or do you think, like, what are your thoughts on that, on Art's involvement?
Oh my gosh. Well, you read the book. You read
Yeah.
all about art.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Well, I think he was, he obviously had that sense of justice. He wanted to right the wrongs that he was perceiving in relation to the them not getting the bonuses, among many other things. Which, again, read the book, everyone. It was very very what would be a good word for it? Stubborn is probably like it's like this way or nothing. Like, I could see there were a few times there was negotiations being done, but he would be like, nah, and that's it. And then the strike would continue. But yeah, that's just I guess the kind of man he was, wasn't he?
You just nailed it right on the head. And because of that fire that lit him up, he probably was good at like instigating or being part of the instigation of the strike and like rallying people. But once the strike actually started and once it was underway, he became very quickly, at least the way he interacted with everyone else, he became kind of a liability because that fire persisted, almost like he didn't have the recognition that, oh, I'm going to be working with these people again. That's like the goal, to be working alongside them and to be working for Walt Disney again. He was very, like, because of that fire, he burned a lot of bridges. And although he was required to, or the studio was required to hire him back, like that was stipulated in the settlement, it was not a happy relationship once he
Oh,
returned back to
definitely
this.
not. No, because I'm
Yeah.
reading that he's, there was like some lot of name calling, and of course the usual, scabs word that
Yeah.
protests and that, which I thought was unfortunate. Because and then it goes back to the idea to not have this as like a good versus evil, like straight, okay, Walt evil, Babbitt good kind of thing, where Art did things which I felt were a bit. It's like, okay, yeah, you got your sense of justice. I get why you're striking. I actually do agree, but you gotta you gotta give a little, take a little in these negotiations, and I felt he wasn't really doing that. That was my
Hmm.
takeaway from it, anyway. I hope I interpreted that correctly. But one of the
Thumbs
other,
up.
yeah, beautiful. I get it, A plus. Now, one of the things that fascinated me, because as you are aware, as I explained before we recorded, I'm doing the Looney Tunes project. I'm reviewing all 1,000 Looney Tunes shorts. A massive, crazy endeavor of mine. So of course, it always fascinates me when I see anything about Schlesinger Studios at the time, and I was actually I don't know if surprise is the word, but seeing Chuck Jones in there, how Chuck would lead a few marches. I mean, were you surprised at the Singer Studios' involvement in this strike when you were doing your research?
I don't think I was surprised. I somehow sort of knew. I think it was in Chuck Jones's first book, Chuck Amuck. I think there's a printout of the unionists at the studio at his where he's working, and I think his name's at the top of that list in Chuck Amuck. So I knew that he was involved in the strike, or at least in like the labor disputes, and I just knew from like some interviews that he had done that he was all about that. I think the extent of the Warner Brothers crew did take me aback a little bit, because apparently all the coolest floats and all the coolest props that went marching up and down the street, they were all by the Looney Tunes folks. And Leon Schlesinger apparently gave them like free reign to use studio facilities to create really cool props, like a giant guillotine and a like a stuffed effigy of Gunther Lessing and French Revolution signs. And so that was one float that they had. They had a float that was a bunch of pallbearers carrying fake coffins, and the names on the coffins were the bogus unions that they wanted to bury, like these fake Disney unions that they all wanted to be rid of, and there were weeping widows with like fake candles mourning the deaths of these fake unions. So like these Warner Brothers folks were like really doing some zany, over the top stuff to assist the Disney strikers. Whenever you see a photo and there's some like really cool, weird, out of the ordinary thing happening, that's more likely the Warner Brothers folks joining in on the strike, on the picket.
Wow, yeah, there's definitely some crazy photos. I mean, there's even on the cover, it's a great photo. You got the angry, you know, Donald there. Uh, Now, I wanted to also talk about the Reluctant Dragon, because I mean, you can't really talk about the strike without mentioning Reluctant Dragon, because I first just to maybe give people watching a bit of a information, because they may not be aware of the Reluctant Dragon. Um, there we go. We can display in the back there.
There you
uh,
go.
so Reluctant Dragon is basically a film featuring Robert Benchley. He would tour the studio, and of course, he visited all the different departments. And I thought it was quite clever. You got the black and white portions at the beginning. He then enters the room, and he's like, "Oh, Technicolor," and the rest is color. And then we see the Reluctant Dragon short at the end, which I quite enjoy. Um, but so I watched it and I enjoyed it for what it was. But then you find out about the strike, and this production was made during the strike. I mean, what are your thoughts on the Reluctant Dragon as a film in general?
In general, it's fun. Taken out of context, it's a lot of fun. Production ended before the strike. Art Babbitt even worked on it for a day, believe it or not. I think I put that in the book.
Yeah,
Uh,
his hand was on the Goofy. Yeah, see,
yeah,
I remember.
good job. Good job.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's his hand drawing that drawing of Goofy, not Ward Kimball's. So yeah, it's a fun movie, and it's fun to get this like Disneyfied picture of what the studio was like. Just like Disney does a Disneyfied picture of pretty much anything. That's where like Disneyfication comes from, right? That term. So production ended before the strike, and the movie was released in the middle of the strike. I think like they were already going to Technicolor for prints by the time the strike started, and Technicolor joined the strike and refused to make any more prints of the movie. So Disney, the company, had to take whatever existing prints there were and show those to a limited number of theaters. I'm sure the company hoped that this was going to be good PR, but there were a couple movie critics who were, I guess, pro union or pro strike, because they had some savage things to say about the movie being released in the middle of the strike. And some of them were just too juicy to ignore. So I included a couple of them in the book. But people were going to see the movie anyway. The strikers who were holding their signs outside the Disney theaters saying, don't patronize any theater that plays a Disney film. Disney is unfair. They didn't really make a huge dent in ticket sales for The Reluctant Dragon. There was a dent, but it wasn't nearly as impactful as the strikers had hoped. The thing that was really financially impactful was the war in Europe at the time. That was really what was threatening the Disney studio.
Oh yeah, that was brutal. That was brutal. That's I mean that part I think is was more common knowledge, but I like how the book does delve into that a little bit further. Because yeah, of course, Walt had all these dreams. You know, he's built this studio. He's hoping that these new movies will bring in all that same serious cash as Snow White did, but then the European
Mhm.
markets get cut off and so on. It's just it makes you wonder, like, if the war in Europe had not happened, what direction the studio would have gone. Um,
Mhm.
would have been an interesting thing. So just to slowly wrap things up, I just thought I'd ask you a few fun questions. That's I guess not related to the book. So what is your favorite like feature length Disney film? It could be either from Walt era, post, whatever.
From the Walt era, oh my goodness, I think it might be a tie between Pinocchio and Dumbo. I just love them both so much. There's just so much artistry in both of them. Dumbo is only like 65 minutes long, and there's like so much story crammed into that. And Pinocchio is just, it's everything. It's a musical, it's a noir, it's a kids movie, it's a horror movie. And there are just so many incredible things, even from a technical standpoint. Some of the like multi-plane 3D effects that are achieved in that movie are just insane, and how you share a screen between Monstro and Jiminy Cricket in like a single shot. Like how they managed to figure some of these visual problems and story problems out. And it still has heart. Like it still makes me emotional when I watch parts of it. Um, I just think everything about it works. The characters are rich. The music, I think everything about it works.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, my personal opinion. I mean, Pinocchio is actually in my top five, so you definitely have good taste right there. Um,
Oh,
the way I look at Pinocchio is that you got the silly symphonies helped set up Snow White essentially because that was like a training ground more or less,
yeah.
and I always felt that Snow White was kind of like a training ground for Pinocchio, and they really solidified it in that, and it's so breathtaking. Now, whether
Yeah.
I'll watch the remake that's coming out in a few days from this recording, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know, but maybe like no comment. I'll probably say on that one. What's your favorite Disney short from the classic period?
I have to choose a single short.
Oh, that's tough,
Oh
isn't it?
Oh my! I think my single favorite short is The Ugly Duckling, 1939.
Ah, the remake one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, they just did it. They captured. That was their final silly symphony too. Like they went out on top with that one, and that just makes me weep. Like every time I see it, when you feel so sorry for him, and then you feel so glad that he's with his mom, and that argument at the beginning between the ducks about whose baby is this you're sleeping around, this the kind of like Maury Povich adult humor at the beginning, but it's all in duck squawking language. I just like everything about that one works. My favorite bit of animation, though, like if I had to find a single bit of animation that still makes me laugh, is Goofy's one man band animation from Mickey's Review.
Oh, Peter Kolvig. That's the one he directed, isn't it?
Yes, and it was animated by Babbitt. And this was my favorite before this project, I think. I think that's a safe thing to say, but it's just a brilliant piece of animation. Like if you're looking at it as an animator, there's so many moving parts and they all have to work in sync because Goofy, first of all, he's still moving like Goofy, but he's sitting on this giant one-man band machine that has every instrument of an orchestra with gloved hands that shoves piece by piece into his face, or you know and it's just hilarious. I mean, I like music jokes also, and just like suddenly there's a banjo coming out of nowhere and a harmonica, and he's able to only get a couple notes in the clarinet, but he's like desperate to get that note before it zips away. just so he can check it off his box. I think it's just so clever, and there's so much personality in that and hilarity. It's just
Oh,
perfectly done.
every time I show it to my kids, because I am showing them, well, of course, the classics, yeah, as I guess a good father should. But yeah, they absolutely love that bit. And when I found out it was Peter Colvey what was involved in the direction, and I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Just knowing who Pinto was, I mean, I could probably talk about him for ages. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of other studios, do you have any favorite shorts, or I guess go to favorites from anywhere else? Looney Tunes, Tex Avery, Tom and
Oh
Jerry.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Tex Avery. He- I love the Magical Maestro. Even though it's not shown a lot because there's some parts that don't hold up well over time, but
Yeah, I know the
you know,
parts.
but just like the pacing, just like it's so rapid fire. I just love how he was just unafraid to just do rapid fire jokes one after another. I love Falling Hair by Clampett. I just think that's great, and I can't hear Yankee Doodle without thinking of the Gremlin laughing his Yankee Doodle laugh. Um,
Yes.
you know, I just all of Clampett's stuff at Warner Brothers is like gold for me. Duck Tracy, I thought was terrific. Uh, which is like what the case of the missing piggy bank is that the name of the short?
Yeah,
Um,
it's the Great Piggy Bank Robbery is the.
the Great Piggy Bank Robbery. Thank you so much. B plus for me, A plus for you. Let's see, my favorite Chuck Jones shorts. I really loved Chuck Jones's High Note. I really loved High Note. I thought that he does a lot where everything is just music notes and one of them is drunk and it's just sheet music. And that one drunk note just messes up everything.
Oh, it's a beautiful short.
Oh yeah. So it's like perfect. But I like music themed jokes. Chuck Jones, everything with Duck Dodgers, everything between Elmer, Daffy, and Bugs. So much of the writing, Mike Maltese is just so really good at making quotable writing.
Oh yes.
You know, And these days I'll say, I don't like pain. It hurts me. Which is the
Yes.
line from the Abominable Snowman cartoon with Daffy Duck. Oh, I can't stand pain. Where he's abandoning Bugs to deal with the snowman, because Daffy's a coward. I'm not like other people. I can't stand pain. It hurts me.
Oh yes. He's yeah, Maltese. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about him for ages. Just how brilliant he was as a writer. It's just fantastic. And he also wrote all the Quick Draw McGraws as well, and how quotable
Mhm.
they all are. And it's just incredible, absolutely incredible. And another fun question is,
Yeah.
any are there any of the early, I guess, animated TV shows you enjoy, like Huckleberry Hound, Flintstones, anything like that?
I don't really go visit the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons. When I was a kid, the '80s Jetsons were on, and I would watch them every afternoon. Jetsons. I don't know if you or your listeners know this. The Jetsons have a really interesting story because they premiered in the '60s, and then they sort of stopped, and then they had a resurgence in the '80s with all the original voice actors, plus a bunch of new young voice actors too. So it was the '80s Jetsons that I really grew up with. And I also grew up with Rocky and Bullwinkle, and I really loved the incredible writing from Jay Ward and his crew there. And I love like early Disney television, animated television shows like DuckTales and Tailspin and all the stuff from the Disney Afternoon, as we called it here in the States. Did you have a Disney Afternoon over in
Yeah, we
Australia?
did. We did. Although Disney Channel didn't come here till I think the mid '90s in Australia. So, but we did have the Disney Afternoon. I think that's what it was called. Again, as we pointed out earlier in the interview, memory's a funny thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what? But
memory.
they were shown.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, those shows were on network TV. They weren't on cable. So I still love those shows. I still love revisiting Darkwing Duck, even the Wuzzles, and also the Warner Brothers shows. Like I watched Animaniacs. I love Tiny Toons. I'm so glad about both of those reboots. Super thrilled.
I got to really watch the reboot of the Animaniacs. So you're saying it's worth watching, yeah?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it was written for. It's more clearly written for adults. I think there are messages in there that are clearly jokes between the adult writers and the adult audience.
Wow, I gotta check it out. I'm not sure where it's actually playing here in Australia, but I'll figure out some way to watch them. Hint, hint. I guess. uh,
Yeah.
so now, now in regards to the book, just to slowly wrap it up. Now, I believe the initial print run, was sold out. Is that right, or is it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was close to being sold out, so it started its second print run. So there's no shortage of books. It just started its second print run because after 3 weeks there was just so much interest, which I'm so thrilled and excited about that
And well
people were.
deserved, I will say, well deserved. It's I mean, because as you note in here, 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I would hope if anyone who working on a passion project for 10 years, you'd want it to be well received, of course, and it's deservedly receiving lots of accolades around, and it's definitely fantastic. I mean, I'm reading the back here. You got Don Hahn, Pete Docter, John Kaymaker, Mindy Johnson, David Alpern, if I said his surname correctly, Michael Doolan, and do you know when the second print run is due to come out, or has it come out?
Um, I think it's already out. So, no shortage. If you buy a book, you'll get it. If you order it from your favorite online bookseller, you'll definitely get it.
And I'll have
Um,
links below for sure. I'll definitely figure that out when I upload this. Yeah, bye. Okay, so Jake, and just to finalize the finish the interview, what are you working on now? I know you'd want to probably take a bit of a break, a bit of a rest after such a mammoth undertaking, but do you have any germs of ideas that you wanted to pursue for your next book?
People ask me about the Disney Afternoon book because that was slated to be released later this year. And unfortunately, it's not going to be released later this year. I don't make the decisions; those decisions are Disney editions. But the book is written. It was researched, written, and edited, and I guess they're just waiting for a good time to tie up all the loose ends and release it. So that will be coming. It is forthcoming. I cannot give a date for the Disney Afternoon book. Um, as far as other projects, there are a couple other things that I have on the back burner, but I cannot tell you. It's too soon.
Big mystery, but that's fair enough because you think, okay, do I go this way? Do I go that way? But as long as we know you do have some ideas that you are going to pursue, that's in the vein of this book. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
fantastic. I'll definitely look forward to it. But look, Jake, I'm so happy, thrilled to talk to you today. This was fantastic, and I highly recommend this book. Once again, I'll yes, bye. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. And to everyone watching or listening, because it'll be either on YouTube or podcast, thank you so much for watching or listening. And until next time, take care.
Thank you.